Okay, I'm in crunch time right now because InterviewStream is not working, so I took it upon myself to find some software and start this recording. So I'm going to read the questions and then pause it and read the next question, whatever, and continue. So the first question, have you been responsible for data modeling and or database design? Okay, so yes, I have. I have modeled when I was a kid in high school, and I used to play Dungeons and Dragons. We had a monstrous manual that detailed all the monsters, supposedly. Of course, they never stopped selling these books, so they always make new monsters, but that's not the point. So I had the first one, and it had maybe 300, 200, 100 creatures, I'm not sure, but they had various stats on them. So I created a database on my 8086. I don't know if you know what an 8086 is, but it's a really old computer. It's like 60 megahertz or something like that. But I think I had a copy of Microsoft Works, and I learned it, and I inputted all the stats for every creature into a database. I think at the time, though, I didn't know much about tables, so I just had like one big monsters table, and I really just used it as a fancy spreadsheet and filtered it. But that gave me the springboard to learn to make a real database in the Marine Corps with no training at all, no database knowledge. They just threw me at it. I had to inventory all the computer equipment that we had in our unit, which was about 1,000 computers, give or take 100, maybe 300, somewhere around there. And I actually did create tables. It took me a while at first. I think I just created everything separate, but then I figured it dawned on me how databases work, and I was mapping everything and linking tables to each other and using primary keys. And then that database knowledge carries over into programming, because when you create objects or when you create classes in programming, you have to model the data in that object. You have to identify what objects interact with other objects, kind of like a table interacts with another table. So I guess for a specific program, I actually identified a character in this game that I was making this program for, and identified variables that I needed to keep track of. So that became my record, the character, and then the record of the data that was used was how many jobs they currently had assigned, and it would check another variable, like a variable outside of the database, or for those characters, like how many jobs to assign total. And it also, so it had how many jobs were assigned to that character, and a percent assigned to each job that the character could have, like a fit for that. So that was like the class would be this character, and the data members would be percent for each job, and how many jobs they currently had assigned, because that job would be how many jobs they could have assigned would be checked to see if they could assign another job, and it was used in this fancy program that I may talk about later depending on the other questions. So, do I have experience with formal methodologies? In which ones? Okay, so that's a business analyst question. Yes, in my microeconomics class, we've taken data. No, basically we've learned how to identify fixed costs and variable costs, and try to figure out what the variable costs for each unit that is produced, and try to identify the quantity that needs to be produced to maximize profit, and also being able to take the price that is given by the market in a highly competitive market anyway, and assume that you are a price taker and establish that into your business, and then find the amount that you need to produce to maximize profits. So carrying that over into managerial accounting, you also have to identify things like fixed costs, activity-based costing, what else? Job unit costing, direct labor costing, to identify how much your fixed costs are, and then also identify the variable cost per unit. And if you're a price taker, you got to be able to calculate those numbers so you can produce a product that is going to sell in the market. And you have to be able to identify those costs so you can manage the variable costs. Maybe you need to lower certain activity pools that are bringing your variable costs too high. So being able to track those things will help, if I ever get a management position, to be able to identify those things and mitigate them if I have to. So that answers that question. Is my strength? That's a programming question. I would say JavaScript I'm pretty good with, but that's not necessarily a programming language. C++, and I'm talking ANSI C++. I do know how to do the visual stuff, but growing up in the 80s, kind of grew up when computers became household products. I learned basic, console basic, before visual basic. So when I wanted to understand programming, a lot of the universities teach, on a visual level. So that didn't make sense to me because I came from an era where we programmed the visual environments for everybody else. Of course, I didn't program the visual environments for everybody else, but it didn't make sense to me to start with a form. Like I thought we had to make the form, but now I understand that these are just tools. Like somebody already did all the legwork. But anyway, to make a long story short and get to the point, I am comfortable with programming at the algorithm level of C++. I am able to create functions that do things like the example I gave earlier was with the characters and pieces of data that they had. I made a labor optimizer for a third-party program. That was a GUI. So I actually had to use Qt Creator, which is C++, except it has GUI front ends and whatnot for GUI environments, cross-platform, and basically edit the open source project, put a button in, create this function that created these new vectors that held characters data that I described, and no, not right now, and taking the data of the characters, which would be the percent fit for each job as well as the number of jobs that they had assigned, and then dump them into a big vector, just a one-dimensional vector that would start with the highest percent and work its way down and start assigning those jobs until the number of jobs assigned meets this maximum number of jobs assigned per character, effectively creating this labor optimizer. So that should answer the question as to what language I'm most comfortable in. It is C++, and some people might view that as a plus because it's a little more complicated than Java, which doesn't have pointer limitations, and it's a little more nuanced than the Java would be. And yeah, so I've actually done some other projects too, I taught myself multi-threading, and a lot of the multi-threading out there tells you the way it should work. I first started with Boost libraries and moved my way on to actually using what was already in the C++, I think 2011 standard or the 1999 standard. I'm not really sure, but using multi-threading in those standards is is far more difficult because you have to you can't pass more than one function when you create these multiple threads. No, you can't pass more than one variable when you create these multiple threads like you can in Boost libraries. So in Boost libraries it was I was cheating. But when I actually had to use real C, I had to create these structures and then pass all my variables into the structure and then pass the structure into the functions that created the multi-threaded function I was working on. So hope that answers that question. Next question is, tell me about a well-functioning team that you were on. Why do you think the team works so well together? Well, hands down, the Marine Corps was the best team I've worked on. And that is because you have people. Basically, when we went out to the field, we were told that I was told by my peers, but who outranked me, that our job was to make sure our staff NCO didn't have to lift a finger. So that meant that these people, my fellow Marines, would actually go and assess the situation and try to do everything without their staff NCO having to get involved. And that taught me a lot about trying to assess the situation myself when I'm in leadership positions. But it also worked well because the Marine Corps, as with any military organization, promoted by rank and experience. The faculty, the ability to be able to do the job well. And so you would get people in higher rank positions that were around long enough that would be able to assess the situation without having to get their seniors involved and get it done. So even if we were thrown into a new environment, we had people that were salty enough to be able to understand what needed to be done, be able to break things down, and they would show people underneath them how to do those things as well, to become self-reliant. And that was a lot I guess the Marine Corps taught a lot about that, like giving you the confidence to be able to understand what you needed to do to get the mission done. And also, failure is not really an option. I mean, I remember one time when we were out in the field and we just could not get this fiber optic cable to work, and we were up for 3 days and no showers, and it was a lot of work. And ultimately, I don't think we ever did get that network cable up and running. I think it was broken. We didn't have any more fiber optic cables, but it just shows you the type of mentality that Marines have, that they don't want to quit until it gets done, or they will exhaust themselves trying to get it done. So yeah, that is an example of a team working well. Okay, last question is, what has been your experience in developing applications, and why are you interested in this area? My experience, I've already kind of gone over them a little bit. Like I said, old school ANSI type stuff, but I have been able to model a couple of systems. I wanted to teach myself multi-threading. I wanted to see if I could test this theory about betting, although I kind of showed myself about betting is like, there's no such thing as, like, you know, a betting system that's ever going to work. But I wanted to test this theory about coin tosses and see it mapped out in a graph on a computer. Of course, I just mapped it, or I exported this file to a comma separated value, but the thing that I learned was how to multi-thread, which means that I had a 6-core computer. I figured I could be doing 6 coin tosses every cycle of the CPU processor, or whatever it's called. So what did I get done? I sat down and I learned how to multi-thread, and it's not very easy. I actually had to look at like Linux examples. Like, the only good example I found was on this example that was talking about Linux, but C++, works on Linux the same way it works on Windows, as long as you're doing it in ANSI. So, make a long story short, I taught myself how to do it with Boost libraries, and then when Boost libraries, somebody said, well, you should actually not rely on third-party libraries if you can do it inside C++. So then I redid my whole project from the ground up using internal C++ functions and methodologies, and got it done and built, and I felt quite proud of myself. So that was one example. The other example is I've worked with a team of people developing mathematical equations to put into this program called Dwarf Therapist. First we took some variables, like some hard numbers, and then we had to break down the numbers and figure out like the frequency of the distribution of the numbers. Originally we were using statistics, and I used my statistics knowledge to model percentages based off of these numbers and the mean and the standard deviation. And then we found out that the distribution isn't normal, so we had to shift over to a frequency distribution, and then map out like the frequency distribution. And then we got all these percents for these different variables, and then we combine those percents into a master percent to give us a good fit for the job. And I had this theory that not a theory, but I had this goal that I wanted to build a labor optimizer. So instead of like characters or people controlling these characters would have to manually set these labors on these characters, and yes, we provided them with a percent for how good they were at that job, but wouldn't it be great if we could just set up like a couple variables and bam, like that, they're all assigned. So I actually sat down in 2.5 weeks. I modeled a system by identifying the variables I would need, keeping the variables down to a small number, and modeled this GUI that you would put in like number of jobs that you needed to assign total per character, like just one number, so everybody could have like 7 jobs, for example. And then you would set like how many jobs you wanted to have filled for each type of job, and then those would be a list that it would check against, and once that job was fulfilled, it would not assign that job anymore. So I had to detail how I was going to do that. I even put in an advanced like priority weight, but that's a little complicated, and it's not really necessary to get the point across. But I built the whole system from the ground up, first in spreadsheet, then I moved it to what did I move it to? I moved it into ANSI C++ using some data just to test it first, and then I actually put it into the production code. And even today, a lot of people use that feature. It's even got its own Wikipedia page dedicated to the feature that I programmed into this program. So I feel kind of proud about that, and it feels good to contribute to the community and know that I'm able to sit down and finish a project from start to finish, especially if it's something that I'm passionate about. So that is kind of like why I want to get into programming. So I hope that answers all your questions, and it was really nice to meet you. I hope that you find my background and experience and my ability to be able to get things done useful to your company, and I hope that I can offer myself to your company in the future, as well as these various skills that I've gone over with you. Thank you for your time.